I assume by now you're ready to talk about how to really sell. And one of the key elements of selling is getting information. But information from somebody who you really haven't met before isn't as easy as it appears. First of all, we have to consider that there's 35% of the way we communicate is verbal. 65% is nonverbal. So the first question I usually ask people is, are they making the impression they want to make? I want you to also consider that there are two first impressions. The impression that you make on the person you're speaking to, as well as the impression that they make on you, because you react to that. So we have two first impressions. But that isn't really the key. The key is, what are the questions you want to ask? There are three basic questions that you need to focus on when you're visiting with somebody for the first time. Now, let's first establish something. What's the one thing that you know about somebody that you're meeting for the first time? That one thing is that they're not doing business with you, yet we don't use that information. We don't use that information when we set up our conversation. For example, here's something kind of ridiculous. You walked into somebody's office and there's a large brown cow in the office. I want you to visualize that. And you can imagine what that looks like. There's a cow in the office. You would immediately say, how come there's a brown cow in the office? It's kind of ridiculous. You'd have to say that. But the fact of the matter is, when you go to see somebody, there is a cow in the office. There is the gorilla in the office. That is, they're using somebody else's product. But we don't say that. We don't actually address that issue. Suppose instead of starting your conversation with, Mr. Prospect, let me tell you all about what I do, you asked a very simple question and said, gee, I'm just curious, how come you're not using our product? You might find that you get a different kind of answer than you're getting now. You might find they've never thought about it, or if they thought about it, they rejected it. You want to understand the buying process, and so therefore what we really want to talk about is what people do, how they do it, when they do it, where they do it, who they do it with, why they're doing it that way, and ultimately you're going to help them do it better. So let's just look at this for a second. You meet somebody for the first time, you shake hands with them. There's a nonverbal transition from that moment into your questioning. And the three basic questions that you want to ask are about the past, the present, and the future, and how and why they've decided to do the things they've done in that order. You want to know their past, what they've done in the past, how and why they've done it that way, what they're presently doing, how and why they're doing it that way, what they're trying to accomplish, how and why they're doing it that way. But asking those questions alone aren't going to give you the information, because people don't open up that quickly. So what we're going to do instead is start out with an opening question. And the opening question I'm going to position with you is crucial. And it's crucial that you listen to this and how it's set up. You're coming out of your opening. Hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. Normal kind of situation. There's a nonverbal transition from that piece, that greet and meet, into the information stage. There's a nonverbal piece where you know it's now time for you to speak. It's time for you to say something. So what do you say? Normally, the average salesperson says, let me ask you everything about your company. That never worked. But here's something that you can use. Suppose you said, Mr. Prospect, before we begin, before we start, would it help if I just tell you something about me and my company first? Before we start, before we get going, would it help if I tell you something about me and my company? Inevitably, the person's going to say yes. In essence, they're going to say, tell me about you and your company. You're going to give a brief commercial. Now, you can't finish your statement because you don't know enough about them to finish it. You don't know about their experience. But you're going to start off with, well, we've been in business for, and we do this, and we do this. But I'm just curious, in the past, have you ever met with anybody like us before? Have you ever met with somebody from my company before? That takes you into the present, that takes you into the future. So what happens is you start to get information that you're able to use successfully when you start to put together your recommendation. I want you to understand that getting information is not simply getting information. It's really creating the rapport and the conversation that you want to have. You're in control. You've really got to think about sales a little differently than you've probably been thinking about it before. There are two basic elements here. One is you're controlling the flow of the conversation by asking the questions. You ask a question, they respond. That's the first piece. But the second piece is psychologically, you're getting them to collaborate with you in understanding the information piece and understanding what it is you need in order to put together the proper recommendation or proposal. In fact, the fact of the matter is, if you don't have their cooperation, you're not going to be successful. So getting information is not simply asking a series of questions, which most salespeople do. It really is creating that rapport. It really is asking questions about them and being truly inquisitive. Now what's going to happen is when you start asking your questions and you ask how and why questions, very important now that you ask how and why questions, what's going to happen is a conversation tree will be formed, and more conversation comes out of that. And as you start to get into that, you'll start to have rapport with the individual that you wouldn't get by simply saying, how do you do that? Stop. What do you do next? Stop. What do you do this? That doesn't work that way. But by having a true conversation and by being inquisitive, you're going to start to get real information and create real rapport.